All right, everybody, and welcome back to the Aurora Space Program Extras series. So, this is going to be those episodes that I try to put in between each of my main series episodes. And they're largely just to discuss what we did in that past episode, like what we covered in terms of vehicles and the process that I went through to create them. So I think first things first, something that I missed in the last episode because I thought that episode was very long for my taste, is I want to go over the X1 plane, and I want to go over the process I went through in building that since I did fly it in 1952. So, and I missed out on it in the last episode. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and I'll come back to you once I'm in the space plane hangar. All right, so welcome back, everyone. Here we are in the space plane hangar. Something that I wanted to cover a bit before I opened the X1 here is that I've had a little bit of trouble in my game with lag. Um, this is the DT. I don't want the DT. I want the regular X1. I've had a little bit of trouble in my game with lag, and that's probably what I think it is. Is it's something to do with deferred rendering. You can see here the process of hovering over this little basket here, this little interactive tool. We're hovering over anything else, it causes lag. I am not sure why that would be the case and why that happens, but I think it's because of deferred rendering because it only began after I added deferred rendering here in 1957. So keep that in mind if you're playing Realism Overhaul and you wanted to add deferred rendering. It's a mod that you can get for KSP. All right, back to the task at hand. Here I have the X1. It's going to be the first plane that uses the XLR-11 engine. One of the things that I like to think about when I go over these engines is I like to look at the burn time. So you can see this can burn for 1 hour, but it can burn for up to 5 minutes. So I know that this XLR-11 is going to be able to handle the 4 minutes that I have of fuel inside. You want to make sure that you have the rated continuous burn time underneath, or I mean, the rated burn time above what your actual time is in your delta V stats for MechJeb. And so here, when I went over this plane, one thing that I like to think about is uh, I, it's hard to describe. So when you have you ever seen the space shuttle land? When the space shuttle is landing, its two rear wheels are slightly higher than the front wheel in the plane. As soon as the rear wheels touch down, it noses down and the front wheel makes contact. When that occurs, the wings have a slight upwards angle towards them, and it generates a negative lift, and that keeps the space shuttle on the ground and keeps it from popping off. And it also contributes to the brake force of the space shuttle. When I create my X planes, I like to do the same thing. I like to take a look at these back wheels, and I like to make sure that they're just a little bit higher in terms of they will touch the ground first if this plane was level. And then the front wheel is just a bit lower than that, or just a bit further up into the fuselage. So that way, when the plane touches down, it rotates very slightly forwards, and that creates a negative lift. It'll allow the plane to stay on the ground a bit more easily. Another thing, when I create my planes, I tend to have a very large vertical control surface. I know there's going to be a lot of people who don't typically do this. They like to have a shorter control surface, like about the same length as these little wings down here. I personally like the taller control surface because it generates a lot more stability when you're tipping up and going vertical. Because one thing that my planes in the past have liked to do is tilt to one side or the other, and you're utilizing a lot of your delta V, um, just in your cosine losses there, and that's something that you want to avoid. You want to try and maximize the amount of speed that you gain for each unit of fuel. All right, so let's look at the Ferrum Aerospace transonic design. So you want to go ahead and look at the cross-sectional curve area. I talked about this in the last episode when I was, see, here's the lag, crazy lag. I talked about this in the last episode when I was talking about planes. But one second, let's let the lag calm down. All right. You want to go to the cross-sectional curve area, and this will tell you where your main points of drag are. Interestingly enough, the highest point of drag here is probably going to be the tip of this vertical control surface. And I'm not sure why the drag goes up sharply at the top of the control surface. Or no, it doesn't. It goes at the tip of these rear wings. But the drag continuously goes up very sharply and then starts to level out here before hitting these gear boxes, the gear station, where I don't know what you call it, where you stow the landing gear. And then it sharply goes up again when it hits the vertical control surface. Now, this is not a great design. I will say it's mostly based on the true X1. I wanted to make it a little bit more stable at high supersonic speeds, but it's a little closer to what the actual X1 is in terms of design. But in this case, one thing that I would like to say is you don't necessarily need to have a perfect curve, but you want to try and get that as smooth as possible. Please excuse me. I'm going to try and collect my thoughts here. I'm rambling a little bit. That's mostly what these extras are going to be. It's a lot of rambling. All right. So basically, what I'm trying to say is you want to try and have this curve, the green curve that I showed you, try and be as smooth and as low as possible. That means you have the least amount of drag going into supersonic speeds. When I built the X1, I wanted the wings to be swept. They had to be swept because I wanted them to be able to perform better at supersonic speeds and switch over to the transonic range as quickly as possible. The real X1 has broad, wide wings. Basically, it's just a rocket-powered World War II plane is what it essentially looks like. But ideally, you don't want to have that. I think it causes a little bit of issues when you're going into supersonic speeds. Your wings tend to cause a lot of instability if they're just straight out and they're not swept at all. Um, and that's something that I experienced on my first few playthroughs of RP1. It's just I tried to make X1 clones and they performed extremely horribly simply because the wings they cause so much instability when you're going so fast. Um, so for these wings, what I did was I created the delta sweep, and then I have these flaps. I have them set for 25% pitch on the inner flap, and then this one's probably 100% roll or something. Excuse me. 70% roll. I don't want to roll too fast. And then these rear wings are what's doing the majority of the lift for this plane in terms of the pitching and whatnot. So I have that pitch set to 100%. If you remember something from the last episode of the extras, I said when you're making a plane, you want to have the pitching force. Imagine this is like an arrow pointing downwards when these wings are tilted to pitch the plane up. Force is pressing down on these wings, which lifts up the front. It's like a seesaw, and the center of mass is in the middle. So you want to have the wings that are actually making the pitching movement as far away from the center of mass as possible. That will give you the best pitch. So yeah, for the X1, I think that was a pretty successful plane. It is a little short, but I had to try and balance the thrust to weight ratio with the fuel that I wanted to carry. So there's that. I also utilized an aluminum fuselage for this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cover the X1 DT real quick. All right, so welcome back. Here we are with the X1DT. This was a plane that I designed. I'm not even sure if it flew in the series, but it was a plane that I had designed. Let's see if it's even tooled. It is. There you go. Uh, Solely to give this uh rocket plane a boost when you're heading up into the upper atmosphere. So the point of this plane largely was to utilize some of these XASR2 engines and give the rocket plane a bit of a boost up as you're getting through the thicker parts of the atmosphere. Then these engines and these rockets would just drop right off, and it would continue on the sustainer of the XLR-11. I might have tested it in a simulation and not found it worked very well. Um, Something that I do struggle with a lot with these engines when I put on second engines, like with the Kawak XJ1 rocket plane test, is it's going to be hard to control the moment of rotation. So let's go ahead and find, here it is, RCS. Uh, you can see that there's a bit of a roll created by these engines, and it's not exactly the roll that I thought it was going to be. Maybe I have that wrong. But there is a bit of a roll created by these engines as they ignite. And yeah, okay, there you go. So if I engage both engines at the same time, the roll is still pretty huge. And the plane has to fight it a lot. So I think what I determined for this plane was that the losses, the drag losses, by having to utilize my fins and my control surfaces, um, was too high for what it was worth. And it was a waste of effort, really, to add these extra tanks when I could just alter the plane altogether. So I just wanted to go over what my thought process was, because you might have saw this plane in my craft list up here when I was opening a new craft. But yeah, so this plane I think was a failure. I don't know. I don't remember if I flew it or not. It's been quite a while since I filmed 1953. But yeah, I'm going to move on to the next plane that flew, which was the X2. All right, so welcome back. Here I am with the X2. This is a bit different than the one you probably will see in the episode. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have the tanks and the rockets on the one that's in the episode. Um, but I did manage to find a way to decrease that moment of rotation there a little bit. The wings, the tanks are a little bit closer, they're underneath the wings, and this engine has a lot more thrust. So it's not like I'm going to have to utilize the control surfaces quite as much. But this is in another episode. I probably won't cover it again since I'm covering it here in this 1953 extras. But I included some control surfaces, and this one, this X2, is based around the engine known as the XLR35RM1. If you go to the engine configuration, you can see it. It's down at the bottom. This is an engine that was designed for, here we go, an RTVA2 High Rock missile. And it's just a single use engine. So every single flight, I did have to replace the engine for the X2. And I guess I forgot to update the text here. I'll do that right now for posterity's sake. And then I'll save it. Um, but largely the plane is the same. One thing that I like to do is whenever I get new technology, tank technology, I'll update tanks. But something that I went over in the first episode, and something that I uh, want to really stress, is you really want to try and save the uh, save the tooling cost as much as possible, because your unlock credit is going to run out really fast if you aren't looking at tooling um, each part and what the cost for that would be. But so yeah, for this one I just stretched the tank a little bit. I probably gave it like 2 more meters. And since this engine had such a high thrust to weight ratio, I felt like it was probably better to uh, increase the tank size and get the most performance that I can out of this plane. So yeah, this is the X2, and I think that's all the planes that flew in 1953. So I'm going to switch on over to the VAB, and we'll talk about the rockets that flew. All right, so welcome back. Here we are with the first rocket that I want to cover. I covered a lot of the rockets that I flew in 1953 in the last episode, so if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. And this rocket here is the Ahote 2. It was a rocket designed to do biological science. It still utilizes the A4 engine. So you can see I have the full 10,000 data units on it, so we're at maximum reliability. You can see it burns for 1 minute and 10 seconds. I have it burning for 1 minute and 11 seconds. You can always push the limits on these engines, and I highly suggest that you do to a certain extent. It'll definitely improve your capabilities early on to try and push the engines past their limits. But in this here, I'm just going to go ahead and continue with the presentation of this rocket. So if I take off all this launch clamps and stuff, there you go. I'm going to remove that. Here on the Ahote, something that I continue to forget to do is lower this control to deflect. I spoke about this in the last episode. You probably don't need more than 5 control deflect on a rocket. Um, they're just they're moving so fast, it's not worth the extra angle of attack on these control surfaces, because it's going to cause your rocket to shake a lot, shake violently. Here I have another camera on the side for good shots in YouTube. And let me try and move this whole rocket over so that way I can zoom in around it a little bit better. That should be good. This rocket's pretty simple. It utilizes some good tanks, steel tanks, very beginning stuff. But I didn't update the tank. I didn't think it was worth it to increase the tooling on a rocket that I wasn't going to be utilizing very much anymore. If I was utilizing it as a test bed, like a rocket that I continuously update, then maybe I would. Maybe I would update the tanks, but I just decided not to in this case. If I open the fairing, you'll see the package. It is a biological sample capsule that I increased in size just for the purposes of making it easier to fit. Otherwise, it would have been this big, and I didn't think I needed it to be that small. That's like for a sounding rocket. So I just upped the size for the purposes of making it look a little bit better. Then I also wanted to up the size because that's the size of the advanced biological container. And I wanted to reutilize this rocket for the advanced biological test whenever that came for the what you call it for the suborbital development program. So yeah, and then underneath that I put 200 units at least of sounding rocket payload. The sounding rocket payload is not needed on a lot of the flights that I do for the Ahote 2, but it is needed on the contracted flight of the Ahote 2 and the other contracted flights. Your sounding rocket payload probably will start out small. It'll ask you to do like what 75 units of sounding rocket payload, but the final contract, the ones that are subsequent, will ask that you utilize up to 200. So when I build my rockets, I like to plan for the future. I like to have those payloads planned out. And then same thing for I like to plan for the future. I am planning for the Hote 2 Advanced Bio rocket, and I gave it 20 tons of controllable mass, even though this rocket is only 12.3 tons. So I think that's it for this rocket, and I'll move on to the Ahote 3 real quick. All right, welcome back. This is the Ahote 3 bumper. It utilizes the same rocket more or less. So I basically took the Ahote 2. I believe I stretched the tank just a little bit, 1 meter or something more. I stretched it because I had extra weight since the biological capsule was no longer in there. I didn't need it for this. This was a launch to test downrange capabilities. It still utilizes the A4. Take this off so you can see the rocket a little bit better. It still utilizes the A4, and then on top I have an XASR2 sounding rocket just put on top, and I have one with 50 units of sounding rocket payload. The reason that I did this is I have a little bit of a sticky note that I like to keep next to me. Um, when you have contracts, something that I like to do is to write down the requirements of that contract, put it on a sticky note, and I stick it on the wall next to me while I play. That way, when I'm in the VAV, and even though I haven't picked up that contract, I won't show you the contracts that I have currently because it's a bit of a spoiler. But even though I haven't picked up that contract, it is on the wall, ready for me to see, ready for me to read all the little aspects of it, and what is required for each of those contracts. One thing that I did was I went into the mission control. I go to all available where it says like the RP1 tab and whatnot. And I went to the downrange contracts and I checked out what were the requirements of the suborbital rocket development program. And I knew that the top 3 contracts were going to be downrange of 3,000 kilometers, downrange of 5,000 kilometers. I mean, top 2 contracts. And what I did was I wrote down all the requirements of each of those contracts. And for the 5,000 kilometers, I knew you were going to need 50 units of sounding rocket payload. And so for that, I decided to, following the same philosophy of my last rocket, I created a sounding rocket with 50 units of sounding rocket payload on it, ready, completely prepared for the next set of contracts that you can get. This rocket is unguided after 1 minute and 11 seconds. I know that one of the requirements for the sounding rocket payload was for the 5,000 kilometers downrange and 3,000 kilometers, is to maintain control for 50 seconds. So here I have 50 seconds at least of control. And I have this engine on top and this rocket. It's spin stabilized utilizing these spin motors that you get. And it has like no electric charge, because it didn't need any electric charge. The point of the rocket was to go downrange. You didn't need to have any scientific instruments or electric charge on it, so I didn't do anything with it. It's just a dart, essentially, that they can track downrange. So that's what I did for the Ahote 3 bumper. I'm going to come back with the Ahote 3F, and I'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Here we are with the Ahote 3F. This is going to be a bit of a bigger rocket. You can see it weighs 15 tons. This utilizes an aluminum fuselage, so we're finally upgraded from the steel fuselage. I wanted to save weight on this rocket because I know that the downrange contracts for the film experiments are up to, I'm checking here, up to 200 kilometers altitude and 600 kilometers downrange. I have a sticky note, and I utilized that during the episode to plan out this rocket. This rocket is fully capable of going 200 kilometers in altitude and 600 kilometers downrange. And then I just mass produced this rocket. I I increase my efficiency. I never alter it and I never change it. And I just utilize this rocket over and over again. So for the first contract, where it's the first um, low space film return, I did that with the Ahote one, I believe. But for all the remaining contracts of the film return, the secondary ones, I utilize this rocket. So that's something that you want to do if you're trying to save a little bit of money on tooling costs, save a little bit of money on like changing the shape and diameter of all these little parts to match the capabilities that you require in your rocket. You want to try and build a rocket that can do it all from the start, um, and then just upgrade the parts as you go. Like as you get new engines, you can upgrade it, and then change the fuel mixture. That's doesn't affect the tooling. You don't have to spend any extra money at that point on tooling. So it's a good rule of thumb, I think, to go with when you're building rockets in uh, RP1. But here we are. We have the payload, very simple film capsule on top, and the same 20-ton avionics core. And what did I say? I wanted to never modify this avionics core. Saves you a lot of money. Avionics tooling is really expensive, and having one that's already set for what you need it to do later on is really good. I knew that my rockets would never exceed 20 tons, so that's why I put it like that. If your rocket is ever too heavy, this is something that I have found. So, since I like to build one size fits all rockets, you don't necessarily have to, but since I like to do that, one thing that I learned when I was creating these rockets is if you go to fuel, where is it? It's utility, maybe. Here we go. So there are these valves. Um, you can utilize them if you need to, if you're building a rocket and it's too heavy or whatever, and your test bed rocket, the one that you're just going to continue to upgrade, is too heavy for your engine, and your thrust to weight is lower than 1.5, I would say that's a good rule of thumb. 1.5 should be the thrust to weight ratio. Uh, then you can put one of these little valves. They cost one entry cost, 1 unit of funds to purchase them. You just slap one on the side, turn off the fuel pumps on your clamp here, and just start draining fuel until your thrust to weight ratio is right, and then launch the rocket. Uh, that way, if you ever want to just keep this rocket same as and just upgrade the engine later on, you have an easy way to get the rocket under the right weight going forward. So that's something that I tested out. I worked around with early on in the series when I was trying to design these rockets. I wanted to come up with some good some good ideas based on the engines that I had. So I know this episode's getting a little bit long. I'd want to try and keep these extras down to about 30 minutes. I think I've gone over everything that I've launched in the first 3 episodes now. So I've gone over everything that I've launched up to 1953, and a little bit including 1954 because you saw the uh, XSR4 and the 4.5. Um, so I think I've got it all set. I think going into 1954, we're going to start to see some more interesting rockets. A new test bed variant is developed. So you have that to look forward to. We'll see new X planes. I don't think I flew any other jets in the last episode. So yeah, I think this episode was a lot worse than my first episode of the extras. I rambled a little bit more in this one. since I have just woken up. I'm just out of bed, and I don't really, I got that morning daze still on me, but I wanted to get this episode out of the way so that way I can get it uploaded to y'all by Wednesday. But yeah, so here we are. That's it. I think that's everything. I've covered it all. Uh, if any of you are playing RP1, I highly recommend that about 1953 to 1954, you start doing bumper rockets, even if you don't have the downrange contracts, even if you aren't doing those. The reason that I did bumper rockets was because I planned to do the downrange contracts. I planned to pick them up and utilize the downrange contracts to farm reputation um, before I went into some of the more important programs. But in the end, I didn't have enough time, and the funding was just not there um, to utilize the downrange contracts for the for reputation and confidence and stuff like that. So I highly recommend that at this point you should try to have at least a design of a downrange rocket that can do the 5,000 kilometers. I'm almost certain that you can do it within the first 2, 3 tech nodes. Um, I just didn't. I was a little lazy, I guess, and I didn't put any effort into making a design that actually worked. So just keep that in mind going forward if you want to farm the confidence from the downrange milestones. Uh, even if you don't, even if you don't, definitely start working on downrange rockets so that way you can prepare for orbit. Orbit is about 94 to 9600 meters per second of delta V. So if you can get a rocket that's going to be about 7,000 meters per second of delta V, that should be able to get you at least to the 5,000 kilometer downrange mark, and it'll get you well on your way towards orbit. And then at that point, you could just keep upgrading your engines when you get new tech and whatnot like that um, to improve your chances. I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's very, very simple, very off the cuff. And if you have any more questions or if you have any questions about the process, uh, go ahead and ask. You can go ahead and ask in the comments and I'll try to get back to you. I also have a Reddit account that's linked to my channel page and I'll try to get back to you in there as well. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.